Some women break loudly. They scream. They throw things. They let the world know exactly how much pain they are carrying so that nobody mistakes their silence for peace. Grace Johnson was not that kind of woman. Grace broke quietly. She broke in hospital corridors at 2 in the morning. She broke in the produce aisle of a convenience store while deciding between two types of instant noodles because real food felt like a luxury she no longer deserved. She broke in the car, alone, before she walked into the hospital each morning, sitting in the parking lot for 5 minutes with her hands on the wheel and her eyes closed, breathing herself back into a shape that could function. Then she would get out of the car, straighten her jacket, and walk in, because Ron needed her to walk in. Grace Johnson was 34 years old. She had come to Korea on a scholarship 12 years ago. A bright, quietly determined young woman from a small town who had worked harder than almost everyone around her and gotten further than anyone expected. She had earned her degree. She had built a life here, a real one. Not glamorous, not easy, but hers. She worked as a caregiver, moving between families and elderly patients who needed someone steady and present, and she was good at it in the way that people are good at things that come from character rather than training. The man who had given her Ron had given her nothing else worth mentioning. He was the kind of person who arrived with promises and left with excuses, and by the time Grace understood what he was, she had already decided that she and her son would be just fine without him. And they were. They were more than fine. Ron was 11 years old and the funniest person Grace had ever met. He had her eyes and his father's height and a laugh that started in his whole body before it reached his face. He collected small rocks from every place they visited and kept them in a jar on his windowsill. He had opinions about everything and was not shy about sharing them. He called her Mom in English and Iyama in Korean depending on his mood, and Grace had never once in 11 years gone to sleep feeling like her life was missing something. Because it wasn't. Ron was everything. Until the night everything stopped. It was a regular Thursday evening. Ron had stayed late at his friend's house and was walking home along a route he had taken 100 times. It was not dark yet. The street was not empty. There was no reason for anything to go wrong. A black car came around the corner moving too fast. The driver overcorrected. The car mounted the pavement. Ron didn't have time to move. The men in the car were Jin Taeyungs. That name meant something in Seoul. It meant something in rooms that most people were never invited into, in conversations that happened behind closed doors and left no record. Jin Taeyung was 36 years old, and he ran an organization that the police knew about and could not touch, and had stopped trying to. He was not reckless. He was not careless. His men, however, had been in a hurry that night, and hurry had made them sloppy, and sloppy had put an 11-year-old boy on the ground. When Jin found out what happened, he did not hesitate. He had the boy taken to Seoul Central Hospital, a facility he owned through a subsidiary that most people didn't know was his. He paid every bill before anyone asked. He arranged for the best trauma team available. He told the hospital director personally that this child was to receive whatever he needed, whenever he needed it, without question. He did not know the boy's name. He did not know about the coma. By the time Ron slipped under, quietly, without drama, the way the worst things happen, Jin had already moved on to the next crisis his organization demanded of him. He did not know he had left a mother in a hospital corridor with nothing but a plastic chair and a son who wouldn't wake up. 2 months passed. Grace learned the geography of that hospital, the way you learn the layout of a place you live. She knew which vending machine on the 3rd floor gave you an extra few seconds before taking your money. She knew which nurse did her rounds at what time. She knew the sound of the ward at 3 in the morning versus 4. The different quality of quiet, the different weight of it. She sat beside Ron's bed every day. She talked to him. She read to him. She played the music he liked from her phone held close to his ear because she had read somewhere that hearing was the last sense to go, and the first to return, and she was not willing to gamble on anything. When she was not beside him, she was looking. She had not gone to the police. Not yet. The hospital had told her it was a road accident, that the vehicle involved had not been identified, that these things were being looked into. Grace had nodded and gone back to Ron's room and started looking herself. She asked questions. She paid attention to who visited the hospital and why. She noticed things that people in grief were not supposed to notice, because Grace's grief had not made her smaller. It had made her sharper, more still, more dangerous in the quiet way that people become dangerous when they have nothing left to lose except one thing. She did not know yet whose car it had been, but she was going to find out. It was a Monday when she first saw him. She had been in the hospital since early morning. Around noon, she crossed the street to the small convenience store she had started using as a second kitchen. Instant rice, soup packets, the occasional piece of fruit she made herself eat because Ron would not forgive her for getting sick. She was at the back of the store looking at the refrigerated section when the door opened. The temperature in the room changed before she turned around. That was the only way to describe it. The way the air shifted. The way every person in that store went from moving to completely, absolutely still. The cashier's hand stopped mid-motion. The man by the window stopped looking at his phone. Two women near the entrance pressed themselves slightly back without appearing to move at all. Jin Taeyung walked in with two men behind him. He was tall, dark coat, the kind of face that was difficult to read, not because it was blank, but because it was controlled, every expression a decision rather than a reflex. He moved through a room the way water moved through a space, finding every gap, occupying it completely. Grace looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she picked up her soup packet, walked to the counter, paid, and walked out. The store remained frozen. One of Jin's men, a broad, flat-faced man who clearly considered himself responsible for managing exactly this kind of situation, stepped forward and reached for her arm. Jin's hand came up. One motion. The man stopped. The door closed behind Grace. Jin stood in the middle of the store looking at the door she had just walked through. Around him, every other person in the establishment was still not breathing normally, and he was, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely surprised. He followed her. She was unwrapping her soup at a small outdoor bench across from the hospital entrance when he sat down across from her. She did not look up. "That was an unusual exit," he said. Grace opened her soup. "Most people stay very still when I walk into a room," he said. "I noticed," she said. "I had lunch to get." He looked at her. Really looked. The way he rarely needed to look at anyone because most people made themselves immediately readable out of fear or eagerness or both. This woman was neither afraid nor eager. She was somewhere else entirely, present but distant, like someone who had already survived the worst thing and was now simply moving through the aftermath. "Are you always like this?" he said. "Like what?" she said. "Unbothered." She finally looked up at him. Her eyes were steady and very tired and entirely unimpressed. "I have a son in a coma in that building," she said, nodding toward the hospital. "Whatever you are not the most frightening thing in my life right now." Something shifted in his expression. Just slightly. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm Jin." "I know who you are," she said. "People talk in hospitals. And you still sat down?" "You sat down," she said. "I was already here." He almost smiled. Almost. "What's your name?" She looked at him for a moment like she was deciding something. Then, "Grace." "Grace?" he said, like he was placing it somewhere careful. She went back to her soup. He sat across from her and, for reasons he did not fully examine, did not leave. The next day she was in the store again, and he was already there. He was standing near the front with no henchmen, no entourage, just himself and a convenience store coffee that suggested he had been waiting long enough to need one. Grace stopped in the doorway. "You're in my lunch spot," she said. "I brought something," he said. He held up a paper bag from the decent Korean restaurant 2 blocks away. "I didn't know what you liked, so I got 3 things." She looked at the bag. She looked at him. "One conversation," she said. "While I eat." "That's all I'm asking," he said. They sat at the same outdoor bench. She ate. He talked. Then she talked. Then somehow 45 minutes passed and the food was gone, and neither of them had noticed the time moving. He was different from what she expected. Not softer. She was not naive enough to mistake charm for gentleness, but real in a way that surprised her. He asked about Ron with a directness that didn't perform sympathy. He listened when she answered. He didn't fill silences with noise. He had the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time in rooms where saying the wrong thing had consequences, so he had learned to say only what he meant. She told him about Ron's rocks on the windowsill, the jar, every trip they'd taken, every stone he'd kept. Jin was quiet for a moment after that. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," he said. Grace looked at the hospital entrance across the street. "He's the best person I know," she said. And then, without planning it, without warning, loosened by something she hadn't felt in 2 months, she laughed. At something Jin said next, something dry and unexpected. It came out of her like something that had been trapped. Short and surprised and real. She stopped almost immediately, pressed her hand briefly to her mouth. Jin watched her. He didn't comment on it. He just noted it. Filed it somewhere that mattered. That was the first genuine laugh Grace had produced in 63 days. She counted later. She knew exactly how many days it had been. And if you are watching this right now and you are already feeling something, go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell right now, because this story is just getting started. And where Jin and Grace go from here, nobody's ready for it. They exchanged numbers before she went back inside. She told herself it was nothing, that she had enough weight to carry without adding complications, that a woman in her situation had no business feeling anything for anyone, least of all a man like Jin Taeyung. She told herself all of this very firmly. Then he texted her at 9 that evening. Just a question about something she'd mentioned at lunch, something small and specific that meant he had actually been listening. And she found herself smiling at her phone in the blue half-dark of Ron's hospital room. She texted back. They texted every day after that. And then came the calls. Late evenings, mostly, after her shift with Ron, when she was back in her apartment eating something she barely tasted. He called. She answered. And they talked. Really talked. The way 2 people talk when they have both been alone for a long time and have forgotten how good it feels to be genuinely heard. He told her things. Slowly, over weeks. About the organization. About what it required of him. About the things he had done that he could not undo and had stopped trying to justify. He said it with the flat honesty of someone who had long since made peace with not being the hero of his own story. But underneath it, she could hear something that surprised her. Regret. Real regret. Not performance, not manipulation. The particular weight of a man who knew exactly what he was and wished, sometimes, in the quiet hours, that he could be something different. "If I could walk away from all of it," he told her one night, "I would. I'd go somewhere nobody knows that name and start over, completely." "Would you know how?" she said. A long pause. I don't know, he said honestly, but I think I'd figure it out if there was a reason to. Grace sat with that for a moment. She did not say what she was thinking, but she was thinking it. Somewhere between the bench lunches and the late-night calls and the way he always remembered the small things she mentioned, she fell in love with Jin Taeyung. She didn't announce it. She barely admitted it to herself, but it was there, warm and inconvenient and real, sitting alongside the grief and the fear and the daily ritual of sitting beside her son's bed and willing him back into the world. She was not the same woman she had been 2 months ago. She was still broken in all the places the accident had broken her. But there were moments now, small, stolen moments, when she felt something other than dread. When she felt, against all reason, like she was still alive. She held on to those moments carefully. She did not know they were running out. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Grace was halfway down the corridor when she heard the voices. She had just left the nurse's station with a paper cup of lukewarm coffee she wasn't going to drink. Her body was moving on routine now. Steps she had taken so many times they no longer required thought. Left turn. Past the vending machine, down the quieter wing toward room 7. That was when the sound reached her. Low voices, male, controlled. Not loud enough to draw attention, but not trying to be hidden either. She slowed. Not consciously. Her body just adjusted. One step shorter than the last, then another, until she stopped just before the corner where the corridor split. One of the voices settled into something familiar. Jin. She didn't need to see him to know. There was something about the way he spoke, precise, measured, like every word had been considered before it left him. She had spent enough evenings listening to that voice soften around the edges, enough time hearing it through a phone in the quiet of her apartment, to recognize it instantly even when it had lost that softness completely. She stood there, not hiding, not leaning in, just still, and the words came to her. "The boy in room 7, one of the men was saying. Grace's fingers tightened slightly around the paper cup. A pause. The sound of someone shifting their weight. "What about him?" Jin said. Not cold exactly, but empty of anything personal. The tone of a man moving through details that did not require his attention. "He's still under, no change since last week." A beat. Grace felt something small and sharp settle behind her ribs. "And the driver?" Jin asked. "Laying low, like you said. Car's already gone." The words landed without emphasis. Practiced, routine. Grace didn't breathe. There was a pause, the kind that suggested something unspoken had already been understood between them. Then Jin again, quieter. "Make sure nothing traces back." The man let out a short breath, almost a huff of reassurance. "Already handled." Another pause, longer this time. Grace's mind caught on the silence more than the words. "And the family?" The man added, like it had just occurred to him to mention it. Grace felt the question before she understood why. Jin didn't answer immediately. For a fraction of a second, a space so small it might not have existed at all, something in the quiet shifted. Then, "Not a problem," the man said quickly, filling it. "They don't know anything." A beat. "Good," Jin said. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, just a word landing in exactly the wrong place. Grace stood there with the paper cup still in her hand, the heat long gone from it. The boy in room 7, the driver, the car. Her mind didn't jump. It assembled, slowly, carefully, like something it had already been building without her permission. Grace didn't stay. She didn't lean forward to catch the rest. She didn't step around the corner. Something in her had already decided it had heard enough. She turned, walked back the way she had come, each step steady, even, controlled. The paper cup was still in her hand. She dropped it into a bin without looking. Behind her, further down the corridor, a door opened. The same voice again. The other man, lower now. Hospital's still billing it under your account. You want us to keep that going? A pause. Jin's reply came quieter, almost absent. Handle it. Grace never heard it. By the time she reached room 7, the hallway felt longer than it had that morning. The door was exactly where it had always been. Nothing had changed. Everything had. She went inside, sat down in the chair beside the bed, took Ron's hand. That familiar small hand. Warm, real, unchanged. She wrapped her fingers around it like she was anchoring herself to something that couldn't move. The steady rhythm of machines filling the space where thoughts should have been. Her mind replayed it, not as a conversation, as fragments, the way memory chooses what matters. 3 hours passed. She did not move, not once. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifted inside Grace Johnson, not loudly, not visibly, but permanently. The next day, she did not answer Jin's calls. He called 4 times. She watched the phone light up and go dark and light up again and said nothing. She went over it relentlessly. She had heard the henchman say Sung-ho's car. She had heard Jin say, "Keep the payments current, I want updates." She had heard 2 months of a man who had been carrying something he hadn't told her. She had heard the weight of it in his voice and mistaken it for general regret, and it had not been general at all. It had been Ron. It had been her son in room 7, and Jin had known this whole time. She thought about the bench, the lunch, his voice at 9 in the evening asking careful questions about her day. She thought about I'd go somewhere nobody knows that name and start over, and she thought about how she had believed him. How completely she had believed him. She didn't sleep. By the 3rd day of silence, she had decided. She was going to the police. She had evidence. 2 months of hospital records, payment trails, a name, Sung-ho, and an organization she knew enough about from Jin's own words to give investigators somewhere to start. She was going to walk into that station and burn every single thing down and let the pieces fall wherever they landed. She got dressed. She picked up her bag. She drove to the district police station and sat in the parking lot with her hands on the wheel. She sat there for 20 minutes, because underneath the rage, underneath the devastation and the betrayal and the image of her son's face against white hospital sheets was something else. Something she did not want to examine. Something that kept replaying Jin's voice saying that doesn't change what it is with a rawness she had never heard from him before. Something that noticed he had said, "Keep the payments current, whatever he needs." Something that remembered he had not known about the coma, had not known who the boy was, had been paying for a child he didn't know belonged to the woman he was falling in love with. She sat in that parking lot and hated herself for noticing any of it. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The hospital. She answered it before the second ring finished. "Ms. Johnson?" The voice was calm and bright in the specific way of medical professionals delivering good news. "You should come in. Ron is awake." She ran 3 red lights. She did not feel them. She did not feel anything except the distance between the car and the hospital, shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. She was out of the car before it stopped moving. Through the entrance, past the nurse's station. Down the corridor. She hit the door to room 7 with both hands, and she stopped, for just a moment, because Jin was there. He was standing at the far end of the corridor outside room 7, coat on, clearly not expecting her. Clearly not expecting any of this. His eyes went to her immediately when she appeared, and something crossed his face that she could not read and did not have time for. She pushed past him. She pushed through the door, and there was Ron. Sitting up, pale, thin, looking around the room with the cautious, blinking confusion of someone returning from somewhere very far away. He turned when the door opened and looked at his mother, and Grace crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled him into her arms and held him so tightly that he made a small sound of protest that she ignored completely. She pressed her face into his hair. She held the back of his head with one hand the way she had held it when he was small, when he was sick, when he needed her to be the thing standing between him and the world. She didn't say anything. She didn't have words. She just held him and felt something enormous and terrible and beautiful crack open inside her chest and pour out all at once. "Mom," Ron said, muffled, "you're crushing me." She laughed. She cried. She pulled back and held his face in both hands and looked at him. This face she had been talking to for 2 months without response, this face she had memorized all over again in the long, still hours. And she just looked at him. Really looked. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. He looked exhausted and confused and entirely himself. "Why are you crying? What happened? How long was I asleep?" "A while," she said. "You're okay. That's all that matters. You're okay." She became aware, slowly, of footsteps behind her. She became aware of who was standing in the doorway. She had forgotten for 60 seconds that Jin Taeyung existed. Ron, coming back, had taken up every single inch of her, but now, with her son's hand in hers and the room coming back into focus, she remembered. She stood up. She turned around. Jin was in the doorway. He had not come fully into the room. He was standing at the threshold the way a man stands when he is not sure he has the right to enter, which was new for him. She had never seen him uncertain about a space before. He was looking at Ron, not at Grace, at Ron. And his face, that controlled, deliberate face that she had spent weeks learning to read, had done something she had never seen it do before. It had gone completely open, like something had been removed from behind it. He was looking at the jar of rocks on the windowsill. Grace had brought it from home on the second day and placed it there so Ron would see something familiar when he woke up. Jin was looking at it like he recognized it from somewhere, like he was putting something together. He looked at Grace, and she could see the exact moment he understood. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to see the shape of it, this woman, this hospital, this boy, the things she had told him over weeks of lunches and late-night calls. "My son is in that hospital. He's the best person I know. He collects rocks from everywhere we go, assembling themselves into a picture he had not known he was standing inside." His face did something she had no word for. She crossed the room, and she hit him, both hands on his chest, hard. He didn't move. He was twice her size, and he didn't move an inch, but he didn't stop her either. His hands stayed at his sides. She hit him again, and again. Her fists against his chest, and he stood there and took every single one, not flinching, not defending, just taking it the way a man takes something he knows he deserves. "You did this," she said. Her voice was completely level at first. That was the terrifying thing. "Your car, your men, your—" Her voice broke. It was the first time in 2 months that Grace Johnson's voice had broken. She hit him again, and this time her whole body went into it, and she was crying now. Really crying. Not quietly, not controlled, the loud, devastating kind of crying that 2 months of breaking quietly in parking lots and hospital corridors had been holding back. She was crying and hitting his chest, and he was not moving and not speaking and not doing anything except standing exactly where he was and letting her. Ron watched from his bed with wide, exhausted eyes and said nothing. Jin's hands finally came up, not to stop her, not to defend himself. He put his arms around her, carefully, slowly, the way you approach something that might shatter, and he held her. She fought it for a moment. Her fists were still against his chest, and she pushed back, and he held on, and she pushed again, and he held on, and then something in her gave way completely, and she stopped pushing and just fell into it. Her forehead against his chest, her hands finally still. He held her the way a man holds something he knows he almost destroyed without knowing it. The way a man holds something he does not intend to let go of again. "I'm sorry," he said. Not performed, not structured, just two words with the full weight of everything underneath them, dropped into the room like something heavy finally put down. "I'm sorry, Grace." The room was completely still. Outside the window, Seoul carried on. Indifferent, enormous, full of people moving through their lives without knowing that in room 7 of Seoul Central Hospital, something was either ending or beginning, and neither of the people inside it knew yet which one it was. Ron, from his bed, looked between the two of them. Then he looked at his jar of rocks on the windowsill. Then he looked at his mother, still held against a stranger's chest, both of them very still now, the storm of it settling into something quieter. "Mum," he said carefully, "I have a lot of questions." Grace laughed. It came out broken and wet and completely real. She pulled back from Jin and wiped her face with the back of her hand. She turned to her son. She sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand. "I know," she said. "Me too." She did not look back at Jin, but she did not tell him to leave. And Jin Taeyung, a man who had walked into a hospital not knowing what he was about to find, who had walked out of a car accident 2 months ago thinking money was the same as accountability, stood in room 7 and understood, for the first time, what it actually meant to owe someone something. Not money, not the best doctors in the building, something that couldn't be paid for, something that would have to be earned. One day at a time, starting now. If this story reached you, subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And tell me, do you think Grace should forgive him?